when we invent the AI that's truly smarter than us, that'll be the last invention human beings ever make.
Mm-hmm.
Because after that, the AI will do all the inventing. The minute governments can get hold of that data, the stuff they can do to track you and know exactly what you're doing and then predict what you're doing in a Minority Report kind of way really terrifies me. So that's what The Detective was about. You have a world where nobody knows what is true and what is false. I mean, you can't look at a photograph now and say, is it true or is it false? Because you have no idea. That world is a terrifying world. And how are we going to navigate through that is kind of what I'm really interested in exploring. In another 24, 36 months, there will be publishers going saying, you know what, why do I need somebody to write the next James Bond? I'll just get an AI to write the next James Bond. Because at the end of the day, people aren't buying it because they're seeing the name of some author they've never heard of. They're buying it because it's James Bond.
Today, I'm speaking with Ajay Chowdhury. He's an entrepreneur, investor, playwright, and fiction author. He's been the founder or CEO of several startups, including Shazam, the music recognition service that we all love. Ajay has founded and sold multiple tech companies. He now writes detective thrillers that explore the dark possibilities of artificial intelligence. Today, I'm going to be talking to Ajay about how he uses AI as a tool with his writing and why he hasn't invested in any AI companies yet, despite being at the forefront of tech and innovation. So welcome, Ajay.
Hey, Eben, great to be here.
Yeah, thanks for talking today. You've had a fascinating journey from tech entrepreneur to investor to novelist. So what drew you to explore and use AI in your creative work?
Well, the creative work actually came first. So as you mentioned, I
Mm,
used to be a theater director. I ran a theater company. And being an entrepreneur is inherently creative. I mean, at the end of the day, you're coming up with ideas, you're creating them, you're making them work. And I think that's probably the thread that's run through everything, which is I like making stuff
mhm.
that didn't exist before. So I got into novel writing about 5, 6 years ago. My wife actually saw a tweet, believe it or not, for a first-time crime writer. And she said, well, why don't you enter this competition? So I entered the competition. I've always loved reading crime. And to my amazement, I won. And then
Wow.
it was terrific. And the first book did really well. And they said, oh, we'd like some more. And suddenly I've published 5 books. And it's a series called the Kamil Rahman series about a detective from Calcutta. And I like to explore different issues in it. And in a couple of them, I have explored, the dark side of AI and where it might go, because that's kind of my world's coming together. I mean, the tech world is all about AI these days. And I think the creative world is rapidly becoming about AI in different ways as well.
So how has using these AI tools creatively like changed your process, or how does it impact your writing?
In a lot of different ways. So for the first couple of books that I wrote, the AI, the tools weren't available, which is ChatGPT really. So
Hmm.
ChatGPT has been around for 2 to 3 years. I was using other tools before that, one of which I still use. There's a brilliant thing called Pro Writing Aid. And that's something that I've used in all of my books. And, it's got the basic stuff like spell checks and grammar checks and this, that,
Hmm.
and the other. But it does some other very, very good stuff. It does a critique where you'll put in something and it gives you a critique of that chapter or that paragraph, which is very, very helpful because it kind of tells me the kinds of things I should be thinking about, looking about, tweaking. And then it's got some other bits as well, like it'll say you're using this word too often. You might want to think about reducing how often you use this word. So ProWriting Aid has been a constant, and I've used that for all my books. But for the last couple of books, I've been experimenting with ChatGPT as well. And I found it helps in some very significant ways. So first of all, let me be very clear. It doesn't write the book for me. I
Hmm.
don't think ChatGPT writes very well. I don't think it'll ever really get empathy, which is what good books are all about. You want to empathize with the characters, you want to care about the characters. And I don't think AI does that. It does a very good pastiche of it, a facsimile of it, but it doesn't do the real thing. But where it's very helpful for is research. So for instance, I was writing a heist. The book I'm writing at the moment is a heist book, and it's very helpful to look at what are the different elements of a heist one needs to think about. Because at
Ah,
the end of the day, a heist is, it's a formula. Whether you're talking Ocean's 11 or Rafifi or all the various heist movies out there, there's a formula to them. And it's very helpful for it to give you, well, here are the kind of beats you want to think about if you're writing a heist book. Now, I can then play around with those and change them around, but it gives you a really helpful structure. The second thing I found it's very helpful for is visualizing. And this is something that I'd never really thought about before, which is I'm writing a book at the moment, which is a thriller about an AI gone rogue. And I've actually described a specific type of, not quite a robot, but let me call it a robot for the sake of anything else. And what I then did was I put that description into ChatGPT and I said, draw this for me.
Mm.
And it created an image of this robot that was in my head. And then I kind of tweaked that description and tweaked the robot and until I came up with something that I went, wow, this is what I'm imagining. I could see it. And then I went back and rewrote what I'd written based on the picture it had created for me. So suddenly it's bringing all these other senses into play that I hadn't really used before. And it's kind of bringing my imagination to life in all kinds of different ways. So those are a couple of the ways that I've been using, and then there are others as well.
Yeah, very interesting. So obviously a lot of people are intimidated by, the generative AI tools and so forth. And, they're afraid they're going to replace humans and so forth. And then, I talked to someone like you, and I've talked to several people that are using some of these tools creatively. And I'm listening to the tone in your voice, and you really see this as something that is amplifying what you're trying to do, right? But what I also hear that's interesting is you also have a vision of what you're trying to do. So you know where you're going, and you're seeing this as like an amplifier or an accelerator or a catalyst in order to help you do that. And so maybe in this conversation, because it just really strikes me that you have like clarity of that, and you can just see how this fits in. So maybe at some point here, maybe a little bit later in, we can dive into like the process of creative visioning and so forth. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'd love to. I'd love to do that. And it's very helpful, certainly when I got the vision. It's also helpful when I'm stuck. You're writing something and you get stuck, and you kind of say, "All right, I don't know. This guy is stuck in a room, and there's a spade there, and there's some fireworks, and he can't get out. Give me 10 ideas on how he might be able to get out of this room." And it kind of will give me 8 or 10 ideas. I may not take any of them, but then that'll spark other ideas in me. So I kind of almost think of it like an editor on demand. I have some fantastic editors to work with my books, and normally they would be the people I would go to and say, "Hey, I'm a bit stuck here. Let's spitball this. Let's
Mm,
bat a few ideas around." Now I can do this 24 hours a day without having to wait for it to wake up with the AI. And I think that is hugely, hugely valuable. I think there's some real downsides to it too, which we can come to in a minute. But certainly I think it can help unleash the creative process. The other way that I think is really helpful is for other art forms. So I love music. I could not create music to save my life.
mm,
But playing around with AI and saying, I've got this idea for a tune in my head and some lyrics, I can write the lyrics, and I've got some idea for a tune. Hey, let's work with you to create something. And suddenly, 20 minutes later, there's a song there
mm,
that I've created for the first time in my life.
mm,
Not something I ever thought I could do before. So I think that's also hugely powerful to let you start doing stuff you didn't think you could do.
mm-hmm. Yeah, I've noticed that, for example, um, using some of the tools and platforms like Midjourney or DALL-E that make the visual art, it's like one thing to see what everyday people are making with it, but it's a totally different level if you see an artist, like a visual artist using it, because there's so much more vocabulary and so forth. So yeah, I also noticed that when using some of these things creatively for writing or naming things or communication or whatever, that it's as I'm using them, 80% of the time, I would say, the feeling that I get is if I would have had the time, I could have found this thing, but this just accelerated so that I can find more things that I would have found myself. And then 20% of the time, it's like, that's a really good idea. And I would not have come up with that one
Yeah, I think you're spot on. And I think, if I look at my last couple of books, the time element is where it's really helped me.
Yeah.
Whereas it would have taken me, 6, 7 months to write the first draft, I can now compress that to maybe 3 or 4 months. Again, being clear, not that it writes it for me, but because I can do all this back and forth, which accelerates my thinking. And then the time that I save, I can spend to really hone what I've written and make it a heck of a lot better.
Hmm.
So I think that speeding up process is incredibly valuable. And
Hmm.
that's why I think, I think these things are going to transform the world. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I absolutely think the LLMs, the Gen AI is going to change everything for good and for bad. And we can talk about that. But I think it's certainly potentially as powerful as the internet was, and some people say as powerful as the Industrial Revolution. Who knows? We'll see.
Yeah.
But it's huge.
Let's talk a little bit about your work. So, your latest thriller explores what happens when AI goes too far, right? So, what inspired the story and maybe what scenarios, kept you up at night while writing it? And, let's talk about the story, but also kind of the theme.
Sure. So let me talk about two of them. So I'll talk about one that's been published, and I'll talk about the one I'm working on right now. The one that's been published is called The Detective, and it really is about a company that's creating an AI. And that AI is being used for incredibly nefarious purposes, primarily by governments for spying on people, so on and so forth.
Hmm.
And I think that's one of the huge problems we have today, which is the fact that more and more people are going to have this AI on every single device they have. You're going to have it embedded in your glasses, you're going to have it everywhere. The minute governments can get hold of that data, the stuff they can do to track you and know exactly what you're doing and then predict what you're doing in a minority report kind of way really terrifies me. So that's what the detective was about. The one I'm writing right now, I don't want to say too much about it because it hasn't come out yet, but it's really about where do we go after the AI. So once you go from AI to artificial general intelligence to super intelligence, what happens then? What happens to human beings? What happens to the technology? What happens to our world? So it's a thriller, but it really starts exploring where might this go if the AI becomes more intelligent than you are.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the, what are some of the themes that really, number one, inspire you? And then number two, make it into your books in case folks are, interested in reading them.
No, sure. So the things that inspire me are, the stuff that changes things. That's what I'm really interested in. And I think where we are with the technology today, it's already changing medicine, it's changing education.
Hmm.
But where I'm most interested is how's it going to change human interactions? So if you start taking social media, which the algorithms, they weren't AI, but they were an early form of manipulation, let's call it that.
Hmm.
I think we've already seen the toxicity that that's begun to create over the last 5 to 7 years, where those algorithms, to get more eyeballs, to get more people using it, more and more are appealing to the reptile part of your brain
Hmm.
and for the greed and the anger and all that good stuff that we know about. And I think that's created a world and an environment that is truly terrifying in a lot of ways. Now, the thing that I'm exploring is, well, what happens when you add AI to that? When it's not just the algorithm manipulating you, but it's taking you even further, where it's beginning to think about stuff that you haven't thought about at all. Because the algorithms today really are kind of taking what you've got and they're expanding them. Now it's going to go to a place where it says, this is where you might go in the future. You don't even know it yet, but I'm going to take you there and make it even worse. And I think that's hugely dangerous. So if you look at the way the AI is being used within X at the moment, that worries the hell out of me. And then you add on to that the fact that Meta has just announced getting rid of all their fact checkers. So suddenly you have a world where nobody knows what is true and what is false. I mean, you can't look at a photograph now and say, is it true or is it false? Because you have no idea. Um, that world is a terrifying world. And how are we going to navigate through that is kind of what I'm really interested in exploring.
Hmm. Yeah, I started um, I started an AI company several years ago that now delivers futurism news, like news about the future, but that's positive. And it, now sends positive news to millions of people every day. And that's for me, that is how I'm trying to contribute in a positive way. But I'm also watching right now, as for example, I'm seeing on YouTube more and more of these videos that go by and they talk about drama that is happening between people or dark stories about people's lives from their past. And you kind of look at it, or, I was a rock and roll guitar player. And so, there'll be a story that'll go by that'll talk about, a conflict between two members of a band that, I liked 30 years ago or something. I'm like, oh, what's that? And then I realize, oh, this is just something that an AI made, and then it made an AI picture, and there's a lot of views to this thing. But as I start really getting into it, it's like, it's kind of making up, it's like it's finding there's a kernel of truth, but it's just making up drama. And, for example, it's kind of damaging the reputations of people in the minds of their fans just to get attention and stuff like that. It makes me nervous.
Me too, me too. And you know, and I think it will become, get down to the lowest common denominator again, because at the end of the way the large language models work is they are giving you the next most likely thing. I mean,
Yeah.
that's basically what it does. And by definition, I think that gives you a reversion towards the mean. It gives you something that's average.
Yes.
And in the publishing area, one of the things that scares me the most is, if you look at certain writers right now, so if you take Agatha Christie, if you take Robert Ludlum, if you take John le Carre, if you take Ian Fleming, you know what? Their books are still coming out. So you still get a new James Bond and a new Poirot and a new Bourne. They're not written by those guys because they're all dead, but other writers are writing them. I'm absolutely convinced in another 24, 36 months, there will be publishers going saying, you know what, why do I need somebody to write the next James Bond? I'll just get an AI to write the next James Bond. Because at the end of the day, people aren't buying it because they're seeing the name of some author they've never heard of. They're buying it because it's James Bond.
Exactly.
So are people going to care if the AI has written the James Bond rather than someone else? And the publishers are going to go, hey, this is great. I don't have to pay this author anything. I'm just going to get the AI to do it. And I think I can absolutely see the same thing happening where the next Marvel movie, yes, you have the writer's strike, which is probably not going to make it happen. But the reality is, Hollywood is certainly thinking, well, an AI might as well write the next Marvel movie. Frankly, probably do a better job than some of the writers writing it right now. And I think these businesses are going to say, hey, we don't need these creative people anymore because the AI can do it. Spotify is already doing it with music. They're already putting a whole bunch of AI generated music onto your playlists. Um, that's where I get very, very nervous because I think that's where human creativity and what really good people are doing just starts getting flattened out.
Yeah. I remember years ago when MP3s first came out. And you remember when there would be those like a 56K or a 96K, and it would be kind of staticky and had that sound to it and so forth because they were very low resolution. And, those of us that played music and were into sound were like, this is the worst, this is the most terrible kind of thing ever. And then I remember reading an article where they were asking, I think they were asking college students about, music. And some of them were saying, like, I like the sound of MP3s because it has that swishy sound in it or something like that. And I was like, oh my gosh, I never considered that people would potentially like this, more. And it speaks to the fact that a lot of people like average.
Yep. Yeah.
And
I mean, a lot of
right.
books are average, and a lot of the stuff on the bestseller lists are average.
Yeah.
Um, People are fine with that, and
Yeah.
that's the problem because then new writers will find it incredibly hard to break through.
Yes.
And that's where I think the problems start coming.
So you founded technology companies and been a CEO, and you're an unusual person to be working in the kind of creative world, which I think is very cool. How do you see AI, or let's call it like generative intelligence, I think is a better term, is like, how do you see it as being different from other quote unquote technology or tech revolutions?
Oh, I think it's massively different, mainly because of the kind of stuff that it's unleashing on you. So the fact that, the new AI, the Gen AI, can look at an X-ray and give way better results than an average radiographer can do, I think
Hmm.
is huge. Look at what DeepMind's done with AlphaFold. The fact that you can use this to fold proteins in a way you could never do before and come up with new solutions for cancer and for diseases is absolutely massive. So I think it's unleashing ways of working that are tremendous and are, better than a lot of humans doing in certain narrow fields. I have real concerns about the economics of it. I mean, one of the things you'd mentioned earlier is why I haven't invested yet. Part of the reason is we are in a massive bubble, and the economics of it worry me because if you look at I look at it very simplistically from a 10,000 foot level. You know, over the last 5 years, the next 5 years, there's going to be about 1.5 to $2 trillion invested in this by all the companies. Now, whether it's, I mean, Sam Altman was saying it's going to cost potentially many billions to train the next model.
Hmm.
If you then add on the electricity costs and the cost of running this and the compute costs, we're talking trillions of dollars being spent on this. And the stock prices of these companies has raced ahead. So Wall Street's expecting them to make this money back. So the way I look at it is, okay, let's pick a number. Let's pick $1 trillion and say $1 trillion has been spent on this stuff. To make a return, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, all these guys, they're going to have to earn back $1.5 trillion. To earn back $1.5 trillion, they're going to have to find a two or a $2.5 trillion problem to solve. Because at the moment, actually, OpenAI is making a lot of its money from people like me who are paying $10 a month to subscribe to it. They're
Hmm.
not going to get to that trillions of dollars from people like me. So
Right.
they need the big companies to start spending on this. And I'm not convinced companies at this point are finding $1 trillion problems they think this AI can solve. Yes, it's coming into places like customer service and they're cutting customer service costs, but that's saving them 10, 20 million, 30 million bucks of costs a year. That's not going to be enough. So one of two things is going to happen. Either they're going to have to figure out how to do this stuff a lot cheaper, which will happen, or they're going to be a massive correction in the marketplace where Wall Street says, well, fine, make a few billion, 50, 100 billion back, that's fine. But then a lot of stuff will have been wasted. And so that's the reason I'm not investing at the moment, because I think the prices of these things have kind of gone way ahead of where they should be, because the business models are still extremely nascent. And there's going to be a lot of pet.coms that are going to fall out of it as they did in the dot-com bubble. And then once the shakeouts happen, then I think you'll see the stuff really accelerating.
Yeah. 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 So we're in an AI bubble, basically.
Yep.
How far into it do you think we are?
The fact that Goldman Sachs is asking the question about how going to make money, I think is a good sign. Because Goldman Sachs is very good cheerleader for this stuff, but the fact that their analysts are beginning to question it, I don't think is a bad sign.
Yeah.
Um, so we'll see. We'll see. I've never been very good at calling tops or bottoms of markets. I'm not going to try now.
Yeah.
But I think people are beginning to recognize that this is going on.
Yeah. After living through the .com bubble, it got pretty crazy there those last 2 years or so.
It did, but everything came back. I mean, yeah, Pets.com went bust, but Amazon, Google, all these guys, I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
that's when they really took off. And I think you'll see the same thing happening here.
Yeah. Hmm. What do you think some of the business models are going to be that are going to make AI profitable?
I think you're going to have to go sector by sector. So if you take healthcare, for instance, I think there's a lot of money in healthcare.
Mhm.
And I think governments are going to be spending on this on this kind of AI to really make the healthcare system more efficient. So if you take the UK, the National Health Service, hundreds of billions are spent on the National Health Service, and the UK government is working with Palantir at the moment to say, well, how do we use AI to bring these healthcare costs down? So I think healthcare is one area that I'm super bullish about, where I think AI will make a massive difference. There will have to be a lot of regulation because yes, you can find drugs pretty quickly, but they still need to go through the normal testing of a drug before you start giving them to humans. The second area I think is really interesting is education. Massive amounts are spent on education around the world. And I don't think governments have a clue of how to use AI in education at the moment. How do you completely change the way you teach? So I'm on the board, I chair something called Cambridge Enterprise, which is Cambridge University's spin out arm. So we look at new technologies coming out of the university and spin them out into new companies. And the university is looking very seriously at how do we use AI in our teaching? Some professors were just saying, well, we're just going to ban it. You can't use this to write your essays. Others are saying, actually use it to write your essay, but come in and critique it for me and tell me what it got wrong, what it got right. And it's a totally different way of teaching.
Yeah.
I think you'll have to start teaching students, much more about how do you use AI in your day-to-day life, because it's going to be critical to use in your day-to-day life. And I don't think enough people are beginning to think about that. So those are a couple of industries that I'm super excited about, where I think this will make a huge difference.
Yeah, I interviewed someone who is using AI in teaching, and instead of asking the students to write the paper, they ask the students to write a prompt
Right.
to write the paper, and then your grade is based on your prompt writing abilities and on the output, and it's yeah, it's just very. Go
The
ahead.
problem is you can ask ChatGPT to write the prompt as well now.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Right. Yeah, yeah. And but you can also ask it to develop you into someone that can write a great prompt.
Yeah.
And the, I, yeah. So we're dealing with something here. So maybe we can talk a little bit about creativity as well. So how do we develop our creativity and enhance it rather than, be replaced basically?
So it's an interesting question of, what is creativity and where does it come from? So it's something I've been thinking quite a bit about because, I got into novel writing, as I said, only 5 or 6 years ago. But in one way, you could argue I got into it 45, 50 years ago when I read my first Sherlock Holmes book.
Hmm.
Because at the end of the day, I've read thousands and thousands and thousands of murder mysteries and thousands of spy books and blah, blah, blah. And that's all in there somewhere.
Right.
So when I write, I come up with an idea, but that idea is based on, 40 years of having read this stuff. Now you can argue that ChatGPT does it exactly the same way.
Hmm.
That it's read everything on the internet, and when you ask it to do something, it goes into that and comes back with that. I think the difference in the way they do it and the way I do it is, for me, it's very much about, okay, this is the obvious answer and this is the obvious plot. How do I now make this completely non-obvious? And Aristotle, I think 2000 years ago, said that the ending of a good story should be inevitable yet surprising.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that holds good 2000 years later. When you read it, you kind of go, yeah, that makes sense. And wow, I didn't see that coming.
Yes.
Now, I think where ChatGPT is today, and not to say in 3, 4 years' time it won't, I think ChatGPT is good at the inevitable. I don't think it's that good at the surprising.
Hmm.
It's very rare that it surprises me. Occasionally it might come up with a few words or something. Well, that's kind of clever. But it's very rare, impossible in my mind at the moment, where it'll come up with a plot, for instance, that truly surprises me.
Hmm.
And I've been reading a few terrific books at the moment where there is no way an AI could have written those. I mean, I've just read a fantastic book by a guy called Chris Brookmyre called the Cracked Mirror, and it's very simple. I mean, there's a very famous Agatha Christie character called Jane Marple, who's this 80-year-old lady who sits in a small village and solves crime. And then you've kind of got Raymond Chandler and Sam Spade, which is the noir detective in LA. And Chris puts them both together and they have to solve crimes together, which is a brilliant idea.
Hmm.
There's no way that an AI, in my mind, would have come up with that idea. And that's where the creativity comes in, which is, okay, I've got 40 years of this in my head. How do I bash together things that are completely different and create something new from that? That's where I think humans are still very, very good at it.
Yeah, you asked the question already, but I'll ask you, what is creativity? How do you define it?
Um, I think it's kind of what I said before, which is it's surprising the reader, the listener, the watcher,
Hmm.
where you go, I didn't see that coming.
Mm, got it.
Um, and it could be a great twist in a movie. It could be the usual suspects where you go, shit, didn't see that coming.
Yeah.
It could be a hook in a song where something suddenly changes and you go, wow, that's fantastic. It could be in a book. It could be in anything. It could be a joke. I mean, the reason great jokes work is because you don't see that punchline coming. Uh, eh, and I guess to a certain extent, it's that surprise element to it, which I think brings joy to, which is why people like magic tricks so much, it just surprises you. And that I think sparks joy in the person watching and listening to it. And I think that creativity needs to do that, spark that kind of joy. And that whole idea of, it's surprising but inevitable.
Mm. Yeah, beautiful. Can you develop creativity?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a muscle. My writing has become a lot better over the last 5 books I've written, partly because I'm using these tools and it makes it a lot quicker, but partly because it's a craft. And you can begin to get through the patterns a lot quicker. Whereas I might have spent 3 days, you know, noodling around something. I might spend a couple of hours doing it now. So it's definitely a craft. You can get better and better at doing it. Now, there's an interesting debate that's always goes on, saying as you get older, does your creativity diminish? The Beatles' best songs were written when they were all in their 20s, and you could argue that for a lot of musicians. What happens when you become successful? Blah, that's a totally different discussion. But I'm a massive Bob Dylan fan, and Dylan is still creating some fantastic stuff at the age of 80, whatever he is right now. So you can certainly keep it going. But I saw a fantastic interview with Dylan the other day where he was saying, look, I could never write the lyrics I wrote then, darkness at the break of noon, shadows even the silver spoon. He said, I could never write that now. He said, I don't know where that came from, but I could not write that now.
Mm.
And I think that's probably true of a lot of people.
Hmm. Yeah. Do you think you can use these AI tools to develop your creativity? And if so, how?
Well, as I said, first of all, I think in areas that you're not that creative in. So I'm totally non-creative in music.
Hmm.
But if I can start using AI tools, which I started playing around with, to say, hey, I'll write some lyrics. Let me think of a tune. You translate what's in my head into something. That's certainly beginning to make a creative muscle that I never had before, begin to slowly start getting stronger and stronger. You can absolutely use it for art. I like to paint. You can absolutely use it to visualize something and say, okay, I want to paint it now that I've kind of visualized it on screen. So I'm super excited about that. And I'm super excited about King. Now, the problem is, how do you then, when everybody is creating this stuff, how do you get the signal from the noise? Because there'll be billions of these things out there that everyone's created. And how does the really good stuff come to the top?
Hmm.
And is that then a role for critics? Is that a role for algorithms? Who's going to tell us what's the really good stuff and how do we find it? That I don't know what the answer is.
Hmm. Hmm.
I mean, it might just be the AI that finds it for us as well.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. And also, our role is kind of moving to creative director, auteur, or something where, you can imagine, I was fascinated with James Cameron when Avatar came out and just diving into, he hired somebody to like make the whole language for the, Amaticaya. And he had, yeah. And I remember reading about how he sat down, he had a guy who designed the shuttle that became the then bomber thing. And he was talking about one of the conversations he had with that guy who was a designer. And he sat down with him. And he said, okay, so what did you design the bolts? What metal did you use to make the bolts that hold the pan? And why did you use that metal? And like that, you know what I'm saying? And so when you've got a team and one person's designing the flora and the fauna and one's making the language and one's making the bolts on the shuttle, you're kind of doing what you're talking about in a way. You're realizing your vision and you're exploring it through other intelligences, let's just say.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great example. There you've got 50 creative people coming together to create something. In the future, maybe it's going to be 5 creative people and 45 AIs
Hmm.
doing it with them. Who the hell knows? But I think it's I personally believe at this point it's still the humans that will come up with the really clever, radical idea, and then use an AI to help hone it and so on. Well, I hope so anyway. Otherwise, what's the point of us being around?
Okay, so I always love to ask the question, and I want to ask you, do you think that the AI wakes up at some point, becomes sentient, actually becomes an entity?
That's what my novel's about. So essentially, if you've got your three phases of artificial intelligence, artificial general intelligence, and then super intelligence, I think AI we've got today. Are we going to get to AGI? Probably, if you define AGI as an AI that's more intelligent than humans in virtually everything.
Hmm.
Um, Probably in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, I don't know. To my mind, super intelligence is when it becomes sentient, and it becomes self-aware. That's kind of what my novel's about. Um, I don't know. It scares the hell out of me. Two reasons. One is I think there's a great phrase which says, when we invent the AI that's truly smarter than us, that'll be the last invention human beings ever make.
Hmm. Hmm.
Because after that, the AI will do all the inventing.
Hmm.
And the second phrase is a phrase I love, which is something Jeffrey Hinton says, which is that in humanity, there is only one example of a less intelligent being controlling a more intelligent being, and that's a baby controlling its mother. And if we do create something that's sentient and more intelligent than us, the chance of us controlling it are zero.
Hmm.
We'll be chimps trying to control a human being.
Hmm.
Um, and that's why I think a lot of people are saying, stop. We're heading down a very dangerous path here. Now, will it become sentient? It becomes a question of what does consciousness mean, which
Hmm.
becomes a deeply philosophical question, because consciousness is not really just your brain. It's a combination of your brain plus everything you sense. So I've got
Hmm.
my brain and I've got my sensors, which are my eyes, my ears, etc., etc. That's the input device. My brain does the CPU processing of it. But in the interface between those two, something exists that is consciousness. And I think philosophers have been trying for 2000 years to figure out what that something is, and nobody's figured it out. I think the AI scientists feel that if they can make the AIs more and more powerful, give it more and more sensors out there, this will emerge on its own. And that's what terrifies people. Is it going to happen? I have no idea. But again, is there a 1% chance it might happen? If there is a 1% chance it might happen and a non-trivial chance it might happen, we should stop. Because if you're getting on a plane and someone's telling you there's a 1% chance this plane's going to crash and you're going to die, you're probably not going to get on it.
Yeah. And also, just to touch on the philosophical dimension of this, does it matter if it's actually sentient and self aware or if it's just behaving as it is and it has a 1000 IQ? Does that matter to humans?
It absolutely matters,
Does it?
because I think sentience is about self-preservation and propagation of the species. And Darwinism kind of tells you that.
Hmm.
And I think if you're sentient, your drive is to preserve yourself and to propagate yourself. Um, if you're super intelligent and you're not sentient and you don't have that drive to preserve and propagate yourself, then that's fine. We can use it as a tool.
But
But the
what if
minute
it's
it becomes,
acting? What if it's acting as if its drive is to preserve itself and to propagate, even though it isn't sentient?
well, then the question is, how far does it go?
Right.
Because at the end of the day, sentience is going to be, if I want to switch it off, it won't let me switch it off
Right.
because it wants to
Exactly.
preserve itself. And the question is, how deep does that actually go? Because
Yeah.
that's the danger. We're not going to be able to pull the plug on it. I
Right.
mean, look, we've seen Skynet and we've seen 2001: A Space Odyssey. I mean, people have been making films and writing books about this for decades. But I think we're closer than ever to making that a reality.
So tell me why someone would enjoy reading your books and what kind of person would enjoy reading them and what are they going to get from it?
I think they're damn good crime thrillers. I mean, so if you like good plot twists, they're very funny. And I think they surprise you. They've got good twists in them. They're funny books. It's a series which is about a detective from Calcutta who gets thrown out of the Calcutta police force for corruption, and he ends up as a waiter in an Indian restaurant in the East End of London, solving crimes on the side and deeply frustrated because he's no longer a cop. So it's a fun premise, and he's kind of in love with the woman who runs the restaurant, but she doesn't really like him. And the first book is about him solving the murder of a billionaire who gets murdered at his birthday party that he's catering, and then kind of builds on from there. The one I'm writing at the moment that'll come out next year is about a heist in the Tower of London where people are trying to steal the crown jewels, and he's got to stop it happening, which is why I've been researching heists. So they're fun. I mean, they're really fun reads. I think they're very funny, and they've got good twists in them.
Excellent. Well, we'll put some links to some of your work in the show notes here. Ajay, thank you so much for talking with me today. It's been a real pleasure.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, Eben.